Hey everyone, Andrea Walford here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create this Thanks for Being You card. Now this features some watercoloring as well as an inlaid die cutting technique. So let's get started. So I have here this flower die from the Sunshine Wishes dies, and I have a piece of hot press watercolor paper. Now hot press watercolor paper simply means that it has a very smooth finish, unlike cold press, which has a much rougher textured finish. Now Stampin' Up's watercolor paper is the cold press, and I do like that a lot, but sometimes I just want a smoother texture, so I opt for some hot press paper. And this is a brand called Fluid, and I just picked it up at my local art supply store. Now my thought initially for this card is that I'm going to die cut this flower out of basic black cardstock, and then I'm going to inlay these petal pieces out of watercolored cardstock. So this is where my watercolor paper comes in. So I want to create kind of like a gradient effect in pinks, or well, it's kind of more like blush tones, and I'm going to use Blushing Bride, Flirty Flamingo, and Calypso Coral. And I'm thinking I'm going to put it on a watercolored tempting turquoise background. So the reason I decided to do this inlaid die cutting technique is simply because I wanted more than just a black silhouette against the tempting turquoise. I actually wanted to be able to see some color. So that's why I'm trying that with this. Now normally when you see me watercolor, you see me use dye ink refills. Now in this case I'm not, because well, I don't have the refill for Flirty Flamingo. But beyond that, when you use the dye ink refills, it's easy because they're so concentrated. I mean, that's what we use to re-ink our ink pads. It can be hard to control the amount of color you're actually laying down on the paper, and I do really want it to be quite soft at the top. So I thought I could probably control the amount of color going onto my paper better if I use the actual ink pads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pool of ink on the lid of each of these. So as you can see how it popped open, and then you simply take it and you kind of squish it together, and what that does is it presses the ink pad against the inside of the lid, and then you can see here it creates a pool of ink for you. So now I've already gone ahead and done that with my other colors. So I'm ready to use those as a palette. Now I'm going to keep this as reference because I really only need a small area of watercolor. I have here a round brush. This is quite big. I can't find my smaller one, so I'm using this big one, although I don't know that it necessarily matters. And I have a cup of clean water as well as a paper towel. So the first thing I want to do is actually add a layer of water. And the reason I'm doing that is that will help keep the color from sinking into your paper too quickly. So I'm applying a decent amount because I don't want it to soak right in and dry too quickly. Then I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to dip my brush in my water. And I'm going to pick up some of this Flirty Flamingo, and I'm just going to kind of drop it here. Or sorry, not Flirty Flamingo, the Blushing Bride. And I'm just going to drop it here at the top. And I'll deepen that up a little bit by adding a little bit more. Like so. And then I'm going to grab some of this Flirty Flamingo, and I'm going to bring it in kind of about halfway, like so. So maybe grab a little bit more. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of this one, not too much because this is a much stronger color. So remember what I'm trying to do is create a bit of a gradient effect. So now I'm going in really barely diluting it there. And I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to blot it a little bit. I'm going to come back with this one and add some more kind of over here. It's funny, the Calypso Coral looks almost muddy compared to the Flirty Flamingo. I'm not even sure if I necessarily like precisely how it looks, so I may not even use that. And then I'm just going to use a little bit of, whoops, that was too much. You can see how the clean water is pushing out the color. Now while it's still wet, you can fix it. Let's grab a little bit more of that. And then blot my brush a little bit better. I'll grab a little bit more of this. Watercolor is one of those things where it's not precise at all. You just kind of play around with it, and it's, you know, you just kind of do your best to get it the way you want it. I mean, I'm not a trained watercolorist or anything. I just like playing with the watercolor. And I think, well, maybe I'll try a little bit of this kind of near the bottom here. As you can see, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get it so that the color kind of comes up a little bit. And then you have to make sure it's wide enough that you're, I think that's probably looking good. Let's see if I can get this just a little bit deeper down here. And of course my paper is buckling a little bit too, which is, so it's kind of wanting, the color's kind of wanting to roll downwards as I'm trying to bring it upwards. I think that's probably good. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to blot a little bit of this extra water at the edges here, because that'll just make it take a really long time to dry. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry it with my heat tool, and then I'll be back once it's dry. So I'm going to be drying it on the lowest setting, which is the #1 setting. So it's now dry. So now what I can do is I can actually go ahead and position this where I want it on the card. So I want to make sure that I get some of that darker color towards the bottom and then some of that lighter color towards the top. So I think I like how it looks there. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to take a little bit of this low tack tape, and I'm just going to use that to hold my die in place, and then I'm going to run this through my Big Shot. So I'm back from my Big Shot. I die cut this piece, and then what I did was I took some more of my low tack tape and I just placed it on the back. And the purpose of that is to hold all these little pieces in place when I actually go ahead and remove the die. So I don't want to lose any of these little inner areas because we're going to be placing them back into the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and set that aside, and we're going to move on. So I have here a 4 by 5¼ inch piece of watercolor paper, same watercolor paper I used for my flower. I have some Tempting Turquoise and some Wild Wasabi ink that I've added a little bit of water to. So now I have my brush again, and what I want to do first of all is I want to add a layer of water. So I'm doing kind of like a wet on wet technique, and although you don't want the paper like massively saturated, you do need enough water that it's not going to dry too quickly, because otherwise you'll have issues with your color soaking into your paper very quickly. Then I'm going to come in, I'm going to take a little bit of my Wild Wasabi, and I'm just going to drop it along the bottom here. And I'm going to kind of rotate this. So I'm just wetting that area because I can see it's starting to dry. Wetting that area and kind of bringing it up a little bit. And then I'm going to come on this end, and I'm going to now take some of my Tempting Turquoise along the top. I'm starting to bring it downwards, but now I'm rinsing my brush so that I have clean water, so that as I bring it downwards, it softens that color a bit. And as long as it's kind of stays a little bit wet. You can play with the color. I'm extending the edge a little bit, and it is going to create a second line around that when it dries, but I'm okay with that. And I'm bringing some of that green up into the blue, because kind of where they mix, it just creates a very pretty color. So there you can see. So I've got a paper towel here that I'm kind of blotting my brush on. And if you have, like here, I have a little bit of extra water on the side, so I'm just going to pick it up a little bit with my paper towel. Because a bead of water, when it dries, can leave a really harsh edge, and then I'm just going to come back with my brush and just soften that up a little bit. Because again, it's still wet, so I can do this. If it wasn't wet, I wouldn't be able to soften it up like this. Now I do have a little fluff on there, and I'm not going to touch that. I'll get it off once it dries. So I'm kind of losing my edge here with the clean, see the clean water kind of pushes the color away, so I think it's still wet there, so I should be okay to add just a little bit more green in there. And I'm really just dipping the very tip of my brush in there to pull that color up. Then I'm going to let the green travel up just a little bit around the outside, because I find it creates a really pretty border. Then once you're happy with it, then it's a good idea to leave it, because watercolor is one of those things where you can take it a little bit too far and then you can mess it up and end up with something that you don't like. So what I'm going to do now, you can either let this air dry or you can use a heat tool, and just to speed up the process, I'm going to use a heat tool. So here you can see what this looks like now that it's dried, and I ended up with this kind of yucky part here where I guess there's a little bit too much water and I didn't notice it, and it dried, and you can see it left this harsh line there. But that's okay, because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it up with a large rhinestone. Because if I go back and try to fix it, I run the risk of wrecking it. And I actually, other than that spot, I like the way the rest of it looked. So now what I'm going to do is I want to add my flower like so, and then I want to stick the inner pieces in there. So in order to do that, the first thing I want to do is I want to stick my actual flower down first. So I'm going to take a pair of tweezers to hold on to it. And then I'm just going to take my Tombow Mono Multi-Liquid Glue, and I'm going to apply little dots of my glue to my flower. And I don't want to necessarily apply massive amounts. A piece of the inner area was stuck there, because of course if you apply huge amounts it can squish out, and this has a very fine line. So where I can see that it looks like there's dimension to my glue, which I don't want there to be, I went in with my finger. Now so you can see some of the glue came around to the front, but what I'll probably do is after it's dry I can always go in and fix that with my eraser. So now I'm thinking that I like this placement, so I'm going to put it down like so, and of course I did have glue squish out, and it looks like that's okay. So now it comes a little bit of a tedious part, of course, because we want to stick in these inner pieces. So what I'm going to do is apply some glue, and I'm going to take my tweezers You don't have to apply it to the inner part of the flower. You can apply it to the back of these pieces. And for some of the skinnier areas, that's probably exactly what it'll do. And then as you can see, you sit it inside like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speed up the camera so you don't have to sit here watching me do this in real time. So now I have this Sweet Sayings stamp set, and I want to use this Thanks for Being You, and I'm going to stamp it here in the bottom corner. So what I've done is I've taped my piece onto my mat just so that it doesn't shift, because there's a good chance I may have to double stamp it. Watercolor paper, even the hot press, which does have a smoother texture, can tend to still have a bit of a texture, so you don't always get a nice dark impression. So the trick, of course, is going to be that I have a really bold line, and then of course the For Being You is quite thin. So I don't want to accidentally really mushing my For Being You part. So, and I keep picking up ink around the edges here. So I just have a scrap piece of paper here, so I'm just going to test it out for a minute. So that is looking good, so let's just try it here. So you can see there, it looks pretty nice, but it's still quite dark. Now I don't necessarily want a lot of ink going on the bottom part, so I'm just going to take this piece and I'm going to press it against where those letters were there. Kind of get as much of that off as I can. So you can see I've darkened up the thanks, but I didn't end up going overboard with the For Being You. And I think that's probably dark enough. I think I like how that looks. So I was looking at my card and I thought, although I liked it, I was still finding it kind of plain. So I found this die that I have out of the Mayflowers framelits, and I die cut it out of basic black cardstock. And I decided to sort of test it out and see if I liked how it looks. And honestly, I think I do. But I don't know that I actually want to go through the trouble of doing the inlaying. So I'm going to do a little experiment. I'm just going to, so I've got here some more of my watercolor paper. I'm going to add some water. And then I'm going to take a little bit of that Wild Wasabi. And I might see, experiment with a little, okay, that's an experiment gone wrong. I wanted to see if I could mix Tempting Turquoise and make a little bit more of a blue-green color. Let's try that here. No, Tempting Turquoise is too dark. That's not going to work. Okay, so let's try again. So basically what I'm thinking is creating more of an overlay rather than an inlay. So I want to try to create a little bit of a gradient again where it's kind of darker. I'll let that air dry a little bit and work on an area here. The color keeps kind of moving because I have quite a bit of water there. I'm just going to blot just a little bit to pull. A little bit too much water there. It's funny, I'm finding that this color has a little bit, seems to have a little bit of a grayish undertone to it. But I was fiddling around a little bit with Cucumber Crush, and I don't know if I can mix that. The Cucumber Crush is a little bit of a different green, and it's brighter, but it doesn't exactly go with Wild Wasabi either. But if I do just a little dot of it, it might actually end up being okay. Might brighten it up a bit and make it look a little bit more green. I like how that one looks. I'm not so sure about that one there. I'm gonna add a little bit more of that Cucumber Crush in there with the Wild Wasabi. So now I'm going to try drying it, and then we'll see how this works out. Oh, and see, that's not bad. So maybe what I'll do is I'm going to, although you know it would be nice if it was a little bit deeper there. Okay, so here's what it looks like dry. And I put my leaf here, and I do like how it looks, but I would have liked a little bit more darkness there. So I'm just going to see if I take a brush that's just kind of damp, not wet, if I can, let's say I add some Wild Wasabi marker, if I can kind of soften it out a little bit. Let's see. Doesn't look too bad. But let's try it this way. If I add water there first, and then I add some of my green. My paper's starting to pill because it doesn't have as much capacity for water as a cold press does. So let me try drying this again. I don't know, I'm not actually sure. They kind of look ugly from here, honestly, but maybe if I put my leaves on top, it'll be okay. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead, stick my leaf down, because really, worst comes to worst, if I really absolutely hate it, I can die cut other leaves. So this one I think I'm gonna stick right here. Like so. And then, because I don't know, that's not bad up there, although maybe that's not bad there. I think I'll just stick that there. And then I'm just going to take some paper snips and I'm going to cut out around these leaves. But first I'm just going to cut it out like this, so it's a little bit easier for me to handle. So you can see my leaves are cut out, but I can see this white edge. So I'm just going to take my marker and I'm going to do this. So basically what I'm doing is I'm coloring the edge of my die cut. And I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but then when you're looking at this card from the side, it's just, it looks a lot more finished than if you were to see that white edge. You know, and if you decided, like, you don't actually have to do, so I've done this watercoloring underneath because I like the watercoloring effect, but let's say you want to do something similar, but you don't want to do watercoloring. Well, you could also die cut this leaf out of and layer it onto just a color of cardstock, and that would work equally well. So now we can probably go ahead and add these to our card, but I'm just going to go grab my card base. So I'm now ready to assemble my card, and then I'll add the leaves once I've done that. So I've got my glue again, and I'm just placing a little bit on the back. and then I'm going to stick this onto my card front. And my card's just a standard 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card. But it's a top folding. That's my favorite style of card. Then I'm going to take my glue and place some on the back of my leaf. I'm going to put one leaf over here. And then the second leaf I want further up. Whoa, I did not mean to do that. Like so. And now, so dealing with that water spot, I'm going to grab a rhinestone. I'm going to see if I put this large rhinestone right kind of on top of that, you can't even really tell that there was a mistake there. But now I can't, you know, I have to fix it so it doesn't just look like a random rhinestone that I placed. So that's where I'm now going to kind of cluster some rhinestones here. So you can see how that looks. So I put one rhinestone down here too, because I also had a little bit of an area that I did not like the look of, and then I just carried it across there, and then I brought one up at the top. So that's what our card looks like, and it's now finished. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and I look forward to creating with you again. See ya!